The summer heat in downtown Chicago was particularly brutal that evening as Min stood outside La Maison, one of the city's most talked about French restaurants. At 8 months pregnant, she could feel beads of sweat rolling down her back as she shifted her weight from one swollen ankle to the other. This was supposed to be a special night, her 5th wedding anniversary, but things weren't exactly going as planned. Min had spent extra time getting ready, putting on her favorite maternity dress, the deep blue one that made her feel elegant despite her growing belly. She even managed to squeeze her feet into proper shoes instead of her usual comfort sandals, wanting to match the restaurant's upscale atmosphere. The reservation had been made weeks in advance, and she'd arrived right on time at 7:00 p.m., only to be met with an unexpected obstacle in the form of a young hostess named Lily. "I'm sorry, but there's going to be a wait," Lily had said, barely looking up from her tablet. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against the screen. "The lobby's getting pretty crowded with reservations. Maybe you could wait outside. We'll call you when your table's ready." Min glanced around the spacious lobby, noticing several empty chairs and the blast of cool air conditioning that seemed so close yet so far. She opened her mouth to point this out, but was cut off by Lily's dismissive wave toward the door. "It shouldn't be too long," the hostess added, though her tone suggested she couldn't care less. As Min reluctantly stepped back into the heat, she watched through the glass doors as other diners arrived. A group of young professionals in designer clothes walked in, and Lily's entire demeanor transformed. Her previously bored expression bloomed into a bright smile as she immediately began leading them to a table. Min noticed they hadn't even mentioned having a reservation. Time ticked by painfully slowly. Every 15 minutes, Min would gather her courage and step back inside to check on her reservation status. Each time, Lily's responses grew increasingly curt. "Still working on it." Then, "Please wait outside." And finally, "Mom, I'll call you when we're ready." The heat was becoming unbearable. Min's feet had swollen even more, and she could feel her makeup melting away. Several other groups had come and gone, all seemingly whisked away to their tables without delay. An elderly couple shot her sympathetic looks as they were led inside, the woman whispering something to her husband while glancing back at Min's obvious pregnancy bump. Min pulled out her phone, checking the time again, 8:45 p.m. Her husband Raj was running late due to an emergency meeting, but she hadn't wanted to worry him. Now, standing here in the heat, she was starting to regret not saying something sooner. A light wave of dizziness passed over her, and she leaned against the building's cool stone exterior, taking deep breaths. "Everything okay over there?" A street vendor selling hot dogs from his cart across the street called out to her, genuine concern in his voice. "You've been standing there for hours, miss. Maybe you should go inside." Min managed a weak smile. "I have a reservation," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "They're just running behind." The vendor shook his head disapprovingly, and Min felt a mix of embarrassment and frustration wash over her. She was hungry, tired, and starting to feel genuinely unwell. Still, something kept her rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was determination not to let this special evening be ruined, or maybe it was simple stubbornness in the face of such obvious dismissal. Little did Lily know that this patient woman standing in the heat wasn't just any customer, and the next few hours would completely change the way she viewed her job, her prejudices, and her understanding of human dignity. The situation at La Maison was becoming more uncomfortable with each passing minute. Min watched as the sky turned from bright blue to dusky purple, the streetlights flickering to life one by one. She'd been standing outside for 2 full hours now, and her attempts to check on her reservation were met with increasingly cold responses from Lily, the hostess who seemed determined to make her evening as difficult as possible. As I've said before, Lily's voice dripped with barely concealed annoyance. "We're very busy tonight. If you keep coming in to ask, it only slows down our process." She didn't even bother looking up from her phone this time, where she was clearly scrolling through social media rather than managing reservations. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and 4 women stepped out, dressed in designer clothes and carrying expensive handbags. Min couldn't help but notice how Lily's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her bored expression transformed into a bright, welcoming smile as she practically bounced over to greet them. "Ladies, welcome to Le Maison," Lily gushed, grabbing menus immediately. "We have a perfect table for you right by the window. Follow me." Min felt her heart sink as she watched them being led inside. She'd counted at least 15 groups who'd arrived after her being seated promptly. The weight of the unfairness pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe in the humid evening air. A kind-faced street cleaner who'd been working nearby noticed her distress. "You still here, love?" he asked, pausing his work. "I saw you when I started my shift an hour ago. Something's not right about that." Min managed a weak smile. "I have a reservation," she explained for what felt like the 100th time. "They say they're busy, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to sound like she was complaining. "But they're seating everyone else who walks in," the street cleaner finished for her, shaking his head. "Don't seem right, especially with you expecting and all." The baby chose that moment to give a strong kick, as if agreeing with the street cleaner's assessment. Min placed a hand on her swollen belly, trying to find a comfortable position to stand. Her feet had swollen so much that her shoes were starting to feel like torture devices. Through the restaurant's large windows, she could see diners enjoying their meals in the cool, air-conditioned interior. The smell of fresh-baked bread and aromatic sauces wafted out every time the door opened, making her stomach growl painfully. She hadn't eaten since lunch, planning to fully enjoy her anniversary dinner. Another group approached the restaurant, an older couple who reminded Min of her own parents. As they passed by, the woman stopped and looked at Min with concern. "Are you waiting for someone, dear?" she asked kindly. "You don't look well at all." "I'm waiting for my table," Min explained, her voice trembling slightly. "I have a reservation, but they say they're very busy." The woman's face darkened with disapproval as she glanced through the windows at the half-empty restaurant. "How long have you been waiting?" "About 2 hours now," Min admitted quietly. 2 hours? In your condition? The woman's voice rose with indignation. "That's completely unacceptable. Let me speak to." But before she could finish, Min felt another wave of dizziness wash over her. The heat, hunger, and exhaustion were finally taking their toll. She grabbed onto a nearby pole to steady herself, causing both the elderly woman and street cleaner to move toward her with concern. Inside, Lily continued chatting with a group of fashionable guests, completely oblivious to the situation unfolding outside. She had no idea that her actions were about to spark a chain of events that would change everything, not just for Min, but for the entire restaurant. With trembling hands, Min finally pulled out her phone to call her husband. She'd been trying to avoid worrying Raj, knowing he was stuck in an important meeting, but she couldn't take it anymore. The screen showed it was nearly 9:30 p.m. Their anniversary dinner had turned into a nightmare of waiting in the sweltering Chicago heat. "Hi, honey." She tried to keep her voice steady when he answered. "How's your meeting going?" "Almost done here." "Everything okay?" "You sound off." Raj's concern was immediate, even through the phone. He'd always been able to read her moods, even when she tried to hide them. "Well," Min hesitated, not wanting to ruin the evening completely. "There's been a bit of a wait at the restaurant. Nothing major, just—" Her voice cracked slightly as another party walked past her and was immediately escorted inside by Lily. "What do you mean? Oh, wait. What's going on?" The shuffling of papers could be heard in the background as Raj's voice grew more worried. "Didn't we have a reservation?" "We did. We do. It's just—" Min took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "I've been waiting outside for almost 3 hours now. The hostess keeps saying they're busy, but they're seating other people right away. and I'm not feeling great with the heat. 3 hours. Raj's voice rose in disbelief. Outside. In your condition? The sound of a chair scraping back echoed through the phone. Min, why didn't you call me sooner? I'm leaving right now. A small crowd had gathered near Min now. The elderly couple who'd stopped earlier, the street cleaner, and the hot dog vendor who'd crossed the street to offer her a bottle of water. They'd all become unwitting witnesses to the unfolding situation. Dear, you need to sit down, the elderly woman insisted, her husband already pulling over a bench from nearby. This is absolutely ridiculous treatment. Min sank gratefully onto the bench, still on the phone with Raj. It's fine, really. People are being very kind out here. She tried to downplay the situation, but her exhaustion was evident in her voice. The meeting's over. I'm on my way, Raj said firmly. She could hear him walking quickly, his dress shoes clicking against hard floors. Just hang in there for 15 more minutes. And Min, I love you. I'm so sorry you're going through this. As Min ended the call, she noticed movement inside the restaurant. An older server had been watching the scene outside with growing concern. He approached Lily's podium, gesturing toward the windows, but she simply rolled her eyes and waved him off with a flick of her manicured hand. The server's face hardened with determination. He disappeared into the back of the restaurant, returning moments later with a middle-aged man in a crisp white shirt, clearly someone in charge. Miss, the man in white called out as he hurried through the front doors. Please come inside right away. I'm Thomas, the floor manager. I've just been made aware of the situation. As Thomas helped Min to her feet, Lily's perfectly composed expression finally showed a crack of uncertainty. She busied herself with her tablet, suddenly very interested in the reservation system she'd been ignoring all evening. I am so deeply sorry for this, Thomas said, leading Min to a comfortable chair in the lobby. Let me get you some water right away. Your reservation has been in our system since last month. There was absolutely no reason for this wait. The small crowd that had gathered outside began to disperse, satisfied that Min was finally being taken care of. The elderly couple gave her encouraging smiles, and the street cleaner nodded approvingly before returning to his work. But the evening was far from over. As Min sipped her water in the blessed coolness of the lobby, she could hear Lily's voice carrying from the podium, speaking to another staff member. I don't know what the big deal is. It's not like she fits the image we're trying to project here anyway. What Lily didn't know was that Raj's car had just pulled up outside, and he'd heard every word. The real story was about to begin. Thomas, the floor manager, was moving quickly through the restaurant, his face showing genuine distress as he gathered items to make Min comfortable. He returned with not just water, but also a small plate of fresh bread and a cushion for her back. I cannot apologize enough, he said, arranging everything carefully. One of our senior servers, Mr. Chen, just informed me about what was happening. He noticed you'd been outside for hours, but he thought Lily was handling the situation. We have strict protocols about pregnant guests. They should always be given priority seating. Min took a small sip of water, relief washing over her as the cool air conditioning helped ease her discomfort. Her hands were still shaking slightly, and she noticed Thomas watching her with growing concern. Should I call a doctor? He asked, noticing her pale complexion. We have several regulars who work at the hospital just down the street. No, Min assured him, though her voice was weak. My husband's on his way. I'll be fine once I rest for a moment. She tried to smile, but even that small gesture felt like it required too much energy. Meanwhile, Lily continued seating other guests, though her previously confident demeanor had shifted. She kept glancing nervously at Min and Thomas, especially when she heard him on the phone, speaking in hushed but urgent tones to someone. Yes, sir, I understand the severity, Thomas was saying, his back turned to the lobby. No, I had no idea she'd been waiting that long. I'm handling it personally now. He paused, listening. Yes, sir. He's on his way. I'll take care of everything immediately. The restaurant's atmosphere had changed subtly. Servers who passed by looked at Min sympathetically, some shaking their heads when they thought no one was watching. Mr. Chen, the senior server who had finally alerted Thomas, kept finding reasons to walk past, each time checking if Min needed anything. A young busboy, probably no more than 16, stopped to whisper to Mr. Chen, "Is it true she's been outside since my shift started? That's like 3 hours ago." His voice carried more than he intended, making Lily's cheeks flush red at her podium. Just then, the restaurant's front door opened, and a well-dressed man in a sharp business suit walked in. His eyes scanned the lobby quickly before landing on Min. The worry on his face transformed into relief, then hardened into something else as he caught the end of a conversation at the hostess podium. Well, maybe if she dressed more appropriately. Lily was muttering to another staff member, not realizing she had an audience. I mean, this is a fine dining establishment, not some casual takeout place. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Thomas, who had just finished his phone call, froze in place. Mr. Chen's eyes widened in recognition, and he quickly stepped back. Everyone who worked at La Maison knew that face, even if Lily apparently didn't. "Excuse me." The man's voice was quiet, but carried an authority that made everyone turn. "I couldn't help but overhear your comments about the dress code." He adjusted his silk tie slightly, eyes never leaving Lily. "Would you mind explaining exactly what's inappropriate about my wife's attire?" The color drained from Lily's face as she finally really looked, at the man standing before her. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Thomas stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Patel, sir, I was just about to." "Please." Raj held up a hand, silencing the manager. "I'd like to hear the hostess's explanation." His voice remained calm, but there was a steel beneath it that made everyone in the lobby hold their breath. After all, she seems to have very specific ideas about who does and doesn't belong in my restaurant. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily's perfectly manicured fingers gripped the podium so hard her knuckles turned white as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The owner of La Maison, the man who had bought the restaurant 3 months ago, but rarely visited in person, was standing in front of her, and she had just spent the last 3 hours making his pregnant wife wait in the heat. The lobby of La Maison had gone completely silent. Raj moved past the still frozen Lily, making his way directly to Min. His businesslike demeanor softened instantly as he knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, his thumb gently stroking her palm. "You're ice cold despite this heat." The concern in his voice made Min's eyes water slightly. "I'm better now that I'm sitting inside," she assured him, though her voice was still shaky. "The baby's been kicking up a storm, probably wondering why dinner's so late." She tried to make light of the situation, but Raj wasn't smiling. He turned to Thomas, who had been hovering nearby. "Could you please get my wife some hot tea? And perhaps some soup from the kitchen." His tone was polite, but carried an unmistakable authority. Thomas practically ran to fulfill the request. Raj stood slowly, straightening his suit jacket. The other diners had begun to notice something was happening, and conversations had dropped to whispers. Mr. Chen, the senior server, was quietly explaining the situation to other staff members who had gathered near the kitchen door. Now then, Raj turned back to the hostess podium, where Lily seemed to be trying to make herself as small as possible. "I believe we were discussing the dress code policy of my restaurant." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but his eyes were sharp. "Sir, Lily's voice cracked. "I didn't know, I wasn't aware that I was the owner." Raj finished for her. "Would it have made a difference? Should it make a difference?" He looked around the restaurant thoughtfully. "Tell me, how many other pregnant women have you made wait outside this summer?" The question hung in the air like a heavy weight. Lily's silence was answer enough. Thomas returned with the tea and soup, setting them carefully on the small table beside Min. He started to step back, but Raj gestured for him to stay. Thomas, how long have you been the floor manager here? 8 years, sir, Thomas replied promptly. Through the previous ownership and now with you. And in those 8 years, what's our policy regarding pregnant guests? Thomas straightened his spine. Priority seating, sir, along with elderly guests and those with medical needs. It's been our policy since before I started. Raj nodded slowly. So this isn't a new rule I implemented. This has always been the standard here. He turned back to Lily. Which means you weren't following long-established protocols even before you made assumptions about who belongs in this establishment. A few diners had actually put down their forks to watch the scene unfold. Min sipped her tea, watching her husband with a mixture of pride and concern. She knew he wasn't just angry about her treatment. This was about something much bigger. Mr. Patel, Lily finally managed to speak, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I can pack up my things and... Pack up? Raj raised an eyebrow. Are you quitting? I assumed you'd want me to leave. Lily looked confused. That would be the easy solution, wouldn't it? Raj's voice took on a thoughtful tone. You leave, we hire someone else, and nothing really changes. He glanced back at Min, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. But I don't believe in easy solutions to deep-rooted problems. The tension in the lobby shifted slightly. Everyone had expected yelling, firing, dramatic exits. Instead, they were watching something entirely different unfold. Tell me, Lily, Raj continued, what made you decide who was and wasn't worthy of proper service tonight? I'm genuinely curious about your thought process. The question wasn't asked with anger or sarcasm. There was a real desire to understand in his voice, and it was this unexpected approach that finally broke through Lily's defensive wall. As tears began to form in her eyes, it became clear that this evening was going to be a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone witnessing this moment. Lily's hands trembled as she wiped away tears with the back of her hand, smudging her perfectly applied makeup. The weight of the moment, and her actions, seemed to finally hit her full force. I guess I was trying to maintain what I thought was the restaurant's image, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at people and made snap decisions about who would fit in and who wouldn't. I thought I was doing my job, protecting the restaurant's reputation. But instead, you were letting your own prejudices decide who deserved respect and who didn't, Raj finished quietly. He pulled up a chair near the podium, turning this tense moment into something more like a conversation. Tell me, what made you think my wife didn't fit the image of La Maison? The other staff members had gathered in a loose circle, watching and listening. Even some of the kitchen staff had poked their heads out, sensing that something important was happening. She wasn't wearing designer clothes, Lily admitted, looking down at her hands. And she looked tired, and her hair wasn't perfectly styled. And her voice trailed off as she realized how shallow her criteria sounded when spoken aloud. I see. Raj nodded thoughtfully. And the groups you did seat immediately. What made them more suitable? They were wearing expensive brands. They looked like they belonged in fashion magazines. Lily stopped, horrified at her own words. Oh God, I've been horrible, haven't I? Min, who had been quietly sipping her tea, spoke up. You know what's interesting? All eyes turned to her. I actually am wearing a designer dress. It's just not obvious because it's a maternity dress. And my unstyled hair. I spent an hour trying to make it look nice for my anniversary dinner. A few of the watching staff members exchanged glances. One of the servers, a younger woman, wiped away tears of her own. The thing is, Raj continued gently, you made assumptions. You decided you could judge someone's worth based on a quick glance. But let me tell you something about image. He gestured around the restaurant. When I bought this place 3 months ago, do you know what attracted me to it? Lily shook her head. It wasn't the fancy decor or the expensive wine list. It was the review I read from an elderly couple who said the previous owner always made sure they had a comfortable table, even when they only ordered soup and shared a dessert. It was the story about how the staff helped a young man propose to his girlfriend, even though he could barely afford the meal. That's the image I want for La Maison. The kitchen doors swung open, and the head chef emerged, still in his white coat. He'd clearly been listening. That's why you kept all the staff when you bought the place, he said. Other buyers wanted to bring in their own people, make it more exclusive. Exactly, Raj smiled. This restaurant's real image isn't about designer clothes or expensive jewelry. It's about making everyone feel valued when they walk through that door. Thomas stepped forward, addressing Lily directly. We've all made mistakes born from prejudice. The question is, what do we learn from them? Lily looked up at Raj, then over at Min, her eyes still shining with tears. I want to learn. I want to do better. I don't want to be the kind of person who makes assumptions about others. I don't know where to start. Min set down her tea and slowly stood up, one hand supporting her back. Despite everything that had happened, there was no anger in her face as she approached Lily. You can start by understanding that every person who walks through that door has a story. They have feelings, hopes, special occasions they're celebrating. They deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look. The restaurant had grown completely quiet. Even the diners were listening now, many nodding in agreement with Min's words. The moment felt bigger than just one incident. It was a reminder about human dignity that everyone needed to hear. Raj watched his wife with pride, then turned back to Lily. So, now we have a choice to make. And surprisingly, I'm going to let you make it. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Raj looked at Lily, waiting for her response. The young hostess straightened her shoulders slightly, gathering her courage. I want to stay, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I want to learn from this mistake. I want to prove that people can change when they realize they're wrong. She paused, looking around at her colleagues. That is, if you'll give me that chance. Raj leaned back in his chair, studying her face. And if I do give you that chance, what would you do differently? Everything, Lily replied immediately. Then, realizing that wasn't specific enough, she continued, First, I'd actually use the reservation system properly instead of making snap judgments. I follow our priority seating policies. I treat every guest with respect, regardless of how they look. She turned to Min, her eyes sincere. And I'd never, ever make anyone wait outside in the heat again, especially not someone who's pregnant. I can't believe I did that. I don't even recognize the person who made those decisions. One of the regular customers, who had been quietly eating his dinner nearby, spoke up unexpectedly. I come here 3 times a week, he said, and I've noticed how you treat people differently. I kept wanting to say something, but I never did. That makes me part of the problem too. His words seemed to break a dam. Other diners began nodding and sharing their own observations. A woman at a nearby table admitted she'd been seated immediately earlier that week while watching an elderly couple wait for 20 minutes. Thomas cleared his throat. Maybe we all need to do better at speaking up when we see something wrong. He looked at Mr. Chen, the senior server who had finally reported the situation. Thank you for having the courage to come to me about this. The head chef, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward. You know, in my kitchen, we have one rule. Every plate gets our best effort, whether it's for a food critic or a first-time diner. Maybe the front of house needs the same policy. Every guest gets our best service, no exceptions. Raj nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. He turned back to Lily. Here's what I propose. You'll stay on, but with conditions. Relief flooded Lily's face, quickly followed by attentive determination as she waited to hear the conditions. First, Raj continued, you'll spend the next month training with Mr. Chen. He's been in the restaurant industry for 30 years and knows how to treat people right. You'll learn every position: server, busser, even kitchen prep. I want you to understand what goes into creating a welcoming experience from every angle. Mr. Chen smiled warmly. We'll start with the basics. Every guest is a VIP. Second, Raj went on, you'll help Thomas develop a new training program for all front-of-house staff. Your experience today will be a teaching tool for others. Thomas pulled out his notepad, already jotting down ideas. We can include role-playing scenarios, discuss unconscious bias. And third, Raj's voice softened as he glanced at Min, who gave him an encouraging nod. You'll join us for our weekly community dinner program. Seeing the confusion on Lily's face, Min explained, every Sunday evening, we host dinner for people who can't afford to eat at restaurants like this: single parents, elderly folks on fixed incomes, students working their way through college. It hasn't started yet because we're still organizing it, but it's something we've been planning since Raj bought the restaurant. The best way to overcome prejudice, Raj added, is to get to know the people you've prejudged. To hear their stories, share a meal with them, see their humanity. Lily's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. Tears of gratitude and hope. I would be honored to help with that program. All of it. I accept all the conditions. The tension in the restaurant had transformed into something else. A shared feeling of witnessing something important, something meaningful. Several diners were wiping their eyes, and even the kitchen staff looked moved. Min reached out and squeezed her husband's hand. What had started as a terrible evening had somehow turned into a moment of genuine change. But the night wasn't over yet. There was still one more surprise to come. One that would prove that sometimes the worst situations can lead to the most beautiful transformations. As the evening's tension began to settle, something unexpected happened. The kitchen doors swung open, and the entire kitchen staff emerged, led by the head chef. They were carrying a beautifully decorated cake with tiny flowers made of sugar and 2 candles shaped like the number 5. We heard it was your anniversary, the chef explained, his face beaming with pride. While all this was happening, my team and I, well, we wanted to do something special to make up for everything. Min's eyes widened in surprise, and Raj couldn't help but smile. The cake was placed on a table that Thomas had quickly prepared with a crisp white tablecloth. The flowers are made from the same blue shade as your dress, one of the pastry chefs added shyly. We've been working on it for the past hour, ever since we heard what happened. Lily stepped forward hesitantly. Would it be okay if I helped serve the anniversary dinner? Her voice was sincere, all traces of her former attitude gone. I know I don't deserve to, but I'd like to try to make things right. Min looked at her husband, then nodded. I think that would be perfect. What happened next was like watching a beautiful dance. The staff moved in perfect coordination, transforming the center of the restaurant into a romantic anniversary setting. Regular diners smiled and watched, some even offering their congratulations. The head chef personally prepared their meals, creating dishes that weren't even on the menu. A special occasion deserves special treatment, he insisted, his eyes twinkling. As Lily carefully served their first course, her hands were steady, and her smile was genuine. The chef prepared a butternut squash soup with truffle oil, she explained, her voice warm and professional. He thought it would be perfect for the baby too, warm and nutritious. Throughout the evening, other staff members kept finding small ways to make the celebration special. Mr. Chen brought over a small cushion for Min's back that his wife had crocheted, kept in his locker for special occasions. The young busboy who had noticed Min waiting earlier arranged flowers from the restaurant's display into a small bouquet for their table. Even the other diners got involved in the celebration. An elderly couple who had just finished their meal stopped by to share their own story of being married for 50 years. Keep loving each other the way you do, the old gentleman advised, and keep helping others learn and grow. like we saw tonight. Thomas had been busy too. Between serving other guests, he'd been making notes for the new training program. Your experience tonight, he told Min and Raj, as horrible as it was, might end up helping us create something really important. Sometimes the best lessons come from our worst moments. Near the end of the meal, Lily approached their table one last time. She wasn't carrying any dishes now, just a small envelope. I wrote something, she said quietly. Would it be okay if I read it? Min gestured to an empty chair. Please do. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Patel, I've spent the last few hours thinking about how to express my remorse, but more importantly, my gratitude. Tonight, you taught me that true class has nothing to do with designer clothes or expensive jewelry. It's about how you treat others, especially when they've wronged you. You had every right to demand my firing, to be angry, to want revenge. Instead, you chose to help me learn and grow. She had to pause to wipe away tears before continuing. Your anniversary will always be special to me now, because it's the day I learned what real dignity looks like. It's the day I started to become someone better than I was. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. The restaurant had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that comes when people recognize they're witnessing something genuine and meaningful. As Lily finished reading, Min reached out and squeezed her hand. The simple gesture said more than words could. It was acceptance, forgiveness, and encouragement all at once. But the biggest surprise of the evening was still to come, and it would prove that sometimes the most beautiful changes happen when we least expect them. 6 months later, Le Maison was buzzing with excitement. The restaurant had been transformed, not just in its policies, but in its entire atmosphere. The changes that began on that memorable evening had grown into something beautiful that nobody could have predicted. The Sunday community dinner program had become the highlight of the week. Under Min's guidance, and with Lily's dedicated help, they now served over 100 people each week. College students, elderly couples, single parents with children. All were welcomed with the same warmth and respect. Table 7 needs more water, Lily called out cheerfully, balancing a tray of desserts. She moved through the restaurant with confidence, but it was different now. Her elegance came from kindness rather than superiority. She had become one of the most requested servers, known for her genuine care for every guest. The training program she helped develop with Thomas had been so successful that other restaurants in the city had asked to use it. It's simple, really, Thomas would explain during training sessions. We just remember that every person who walks through that door has a story worth hearing. Mr. Chen beamed with pride whenever he talked about Lily's transformation. She learned every position, just like Mr. Patel said. Even spent time washing dishes to understand every aspect of the restaurant. That's dedication. But today was special for another reason. Min and Raj were bringing their baby daughter to the restaurant for the first time. When they walked in, carrying their tiny bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket, the entire staff gathered to welcome them. "Oh, she's beautiful," the head chef exclaimed, peeking at the sleeping baby. He had prepared special celebratory dishes for everyone, including the Sunday community dinner guests who had stayed to share in the joy. Lily approached with tears in her eyes, carrying a small gift. "We all pitched in," she explained, handing the package to Min. Inside was a tiny silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Born from love, raised with dignity." "Because that's what this place has become about," Lily explained softly. "Dignity for everyone who walks through these doors." The elderly couple who had witnessed the original incident 6 months ago were there too. They had become regular Sunday volunteers. "Look how things change," the old gentleman said, smiling. "From one of the worst nights to all of this beauty." The restaurant had been transformed in other ways too. The walls now display photographs of their community dinner guests, each with their own story written beneath. College students studying late, grandparents sharing meals with grandchildren, single parents enjoying a moment of peace, all captured in beautiful moments of dignity and joy. The young busboy, now promoted to server, had started a program where local students could learn about the restaurant industry. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow, he would say, echoing the lessons from that pivotal night. As Min and Raj settled at their special table, the same one where they had sat on that transformative evening, Lily approached with a small cake. For baby's first restaurant visit, she announced proudly. The cake was decorated with tiny pink flowers, just like the one from their anniversary night. You know, Min said, looking around at all the smiling faces, that difficult night turned out to be a gift. Look at all the lives we've touched, all the changes we've made together. Raj squeezed her hand and gazed at their sleeping daughter. And now she'll grow up in a place that truly understands what matters, not how people look or what they wear, but who they are inside. The baby chose that moment to wake up, her tiny eyes opening to take in the warm lights and loving faces around her. Everyone watched in delight as she gave her first little smile in the restaurant. "Welcome to Le Maison, little one," Lily said softly, "where every person's story matters and everyone is treated with dignity, starting with you." And as the evening sun cast a warm glow through the windows, illuminating the happy faces of staff and guests alike, it was clear that sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from the most unexpected moments. What had started as an incident of prejudice had blossomed into a legacy of love, learning, and respect that would touch lives for generations to come.